If you have ever touched a computer, maybe played video games, or, just logged onto the internet, odds are incredibly high that you've used a Microsoft product.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a company whose sheer ubiquity is, well, staggering, really.
But what we find truly fascinating about this decades-old behemoth, isn't just its size. It's the fact that it has achieved true market-defining dominance, not once, but actually twice. And that required a radical, almost existential reinvention right in the middle.
That's the compelling narrative we found throughout the source material.
Yeah.
You see this huge arc, the initial desktop dominance, right? Then this period of institutional inertia that nearly paralyzed the company, stagnation.
Yeah, the lost years almost.
Exactly. And then this dramatic, pretty painful cultural and strategic turnaround that got going around 2014. That pivot didn't just save Microsoft. It really paved the way for its current status as a true AI and cloud giant.
So, our mission in this deep dive is to unpack that stack of sources for you. We're going to trace the journey from, a few high school kids tinkering with teletype machines back in the 60s.
Incredible beginnings.
All the way to a, multi-trillion-dollar cloud platform that now fundamentally shapes how AI is developed and consumed globally.
And we really have to tackle the big question here. How did a company, once famous for its suffocating internal silos and this real Windows-first complacency.
Right, that focus on Windows above all else.
How did it successfully transform into an agile, AI cloud-first platform leader? And, how did they pull off that transformation while constantly operating under the shadow of intense antitrust scrutiny?
That's a huge piece of it.
This story is just a critical case study in corporate survival, resilience, and reinvention for anyone managing an established business today, really.
Okay, so to really understand the comeback, you have to understand the beginning, right? Let's travel back to 1968. With the formation of the legendary Lakeside Programmers Club, this story gets told quickly sometimes, but it perfectly encapsulates that opportunistic, maybe even aggressive drive that defined Microsoft's earliest years.
It was incredibly humble. I mean, we're talking about 4 teenagers at Seattle's Lakeside School. Bill Gates and Paul Allen were among them, obviously. And they were just obsessed with the school's new, very expensive computer setup, a teletype Model 33.
Wow, a teletype?
Yeah, the only problem was access.
Right, they desperately wanted to program games or, utility tools, but they needed to rent computer usage time at the Computer Center Corporation, the CCC. And the cost was, staggering, $40 an hour.
Yeah, there was just an almost impossible cost for high school students back then. So the sources revealed they found a workaround. And it was rooted in really knowing the system deeply.
Okay, what did they do?
They figured out they could exploit known bugs in the computer system to basically log in and program for free. They were stealing hours of time without generating a bill.
Huh, that sounds like them already.
It does, doesn't it? This went on until, pretty predictably, the CCC caught them stealing usage time and banned all 4 students immediately.
Okay, busted. But here's the first, brilliant strategic pivot, isn't it? Instead of just walking away.
Right.
They formed the Lakeside Programmers Club, and they offered to use their skills to identify and fix the very programming bugs they had been exploiting.
Essentially selling their security consulting services back to the company that caught them.
Incredible.
And who was their very first, probably very reluctant customer?
How can you guess? CCC.
The Computer Center Corporation itself. The same company that banned them the year before hired them to make the systems more robust.
Wow.
It was this instant high-stakes lesson in turning deep product knowledge, even knowledge of its flaws, into a viable service and, a strategic advantage. That mindset really set the stage for everything that followed. Hashtag 1.2.
Yeah.
The birth of Microsoft and early strategy.
Okay, so the next crucial moment comes a bit later, 1975. The real catalyst for Microsoft as a proper business was the publication of Popular Electronics magazine. It featured the Altair 8800 microcomputer. And this machine was revolutionary, right? Generally seen as the first commercially successful personal computer kit.
Yeah, total breakthrough.
Gates and Allen immediately recognized this was the platform shift moment. This was the future. So they called the Altair inventors at MITS and made what is, arguably one of the boldest, most audacious claims in tech history.
Which was?
That they had a working basic programming language interpreter specifically tailored for the Altair.
Okay.
Even though they hadn't written a single line for it yet.
No way. So it was pure bluff.
Pure bluff. But it forced action. Gates immediately started coding the interpreter while Allen was tasked with building this complex simulator to test the code. The pressure must have been unbelievable.
I can only imagine. And that led to those famous kind of last-minute heroics, right? Yeah, the sources confirmed the pressure was intense. The boot-up system for the interpreter, the very first bit of code the machine needed to run, still wasn't ready right up until the deadline.
Seriously?
Paul Allen apparently had to write the final bits of code on the plane ride to Albuquerque, New Mexico, where they were scheduled to meet with Emites.
On the plane? That's cutting it fine.
Incredibly fine. And the meeting itself was the first full test of the software. They arrived, they ran the tests.
Holding their breath, I assume.
Must have been. And it worked. Perfectly.
Wow.
Emites agreed right there to distribute the product, which became known as Altair Basic. And that became the very first commercial product of their newly established venture, microcomputer software.
Which they soon trademarked as
Microsoft, hashtag 1.3, conquering the desktop era, the MS-DOS play.
So Altair Basic was a success, put them on the map, but the true foundational moment for global dominance came in 1980, that negotiation that led to MS-DOS.
Yeah, this is the big one. Microsoft, by then a successful, smallish company, struck a deal with IBM.
IBM, the giant.
The giant. IBM was preparing to launch its groundbreaking personal computer, the IBM PC, and needed an operating system to run it. And Microsoft, once again, agreed to provide a product it didn't actually own yet.
There's that pattern again. Okay, so what did they do this time?
Well, this is the strategic move that really cemented their financial future. They quickly located and acquired an operating system called 86DOS from a small company, Seattle Computer Products.
Yep.
They paid a relatively small sum for it, $75,000, plus a royalty agreement. And they immediately rebranded this product as MS-DOS.
$75,000? That seems cheap in retrospect.
Incredibly cheap for what it became. But the real masterstroke, the decision that created this multi-decade monopoly, was how the licensing was structured.
Yeah, the licensing. Tell us about that.
Microsoft didn't just license MS-DOS to IBM for their PC. Crucially, they insisted on retaining the right to license the software to everyone else who wanted to build an IBM PC-compatible machine.
Ooh, that's clever. So not an exclusive deal with IBM.
It's exactly, not exclusive. And they executed that right aggressively. They licensed MS-DOS to over 70 other computer manufacturers, including soon-to-be giants like Compaq.
Right.
So by making MS-DOS the necessary universally accepted operating system for the entire burgeoning PC industry, they achieved ubiquity.
Everyone needed it if they wanted to run the same software as the IBM PC.
Precisely. When the IBM PC launched in 1981, it was a huge success. And MS-DOS just became the dominant OS in the world, establishing Microsoft's first truly unassailable platform advantage. Hashtag 1.4, the Windows 95 revolution and marketing blitz.
Okay, so MS-DOS was powerful, command line driven, text on a black screen, very functional.
Very functional, not very user-friendly, though.
Right. And meanwhile, Apple was pushing graphical user interfaces, GUIs. Microsoft knew they had to follow suit.
Yeah, Windows 1.0 back in 1985 was kind of their first attempt. It was an initial flop, really. It didn't gain much traction.
But it laid the groundwork.
It laid the groundwork for the generational leap forward that came a decade later.
Windows 95.
Windows 95. Released in 1995, it fundamentally changed how billions of people interacted with computers. It popularized concepts we just take for granted now, like the taskbar, minimizing windows, and of course, most famously,
the start button.
The start button. It felt revolutionary at the time.
And Microsoft understood this wasn't just another software release, did they? They treated it like a cultural event.
Oh, absolutely. They knew it was an inflection point and required this massive public demonstration of confidence. The sources detail a staggering $300 million marketing campaign.
$300 million for software marketing in 95. That's just incredible.
It was revolutionary for a software company back then. The scale of the blitz was totally unprecedented. They bought, I think it was 1.5 million copies of the Times newspaper in the UK just to give away.
Giving away newspapers to advertise software?
Essentially handing out free advertising to an entire nation, yeah.
Yeah.
They lit up the Empire State Building in the Windows logo colors. They hung these colossal banners off landmarks like the CN Tower in Toronto.
Wow. Very visible.
Extremely visible. And the auditory component was just as impactful. They licensed the Rolling Stones' Start Me Up for the television commercials.
Perfect choice, referencing the start button.
Couldn't have been better. It signified the start of a new technological era. And they got Jay Leno to host the product launch event, lending this sort of Hollywood gravitas to a software release.
Amazing. And did it work? The massive spend.
It paid off immediately, spectacularly.
Mhm.
Windows 95 sold 1 million copies in just 4 days.
1 million in 4 days.
Yeah. It cemented their desktop dominance globally and essentially doubled the company's valuation within months. It really set the stage for decades of incredible profitability.
And as we'll see.
And eventually, incredible complacency.
Right, so that financial explosion following Windows 95, that peak dominance, led pretty directly into the period of peak regulatory scrutiny. And ironically, also internal stagnation. Success, as it turns out, can be kind of toxic to long-term innovation sometimes.
It absolutely can.
The shadow we're talking about here is primarily the 1998 U.S. Department of Justice lawsuit, right?
That's the big one, yeah. The core of the case, under the Sherman Act, was a claim of illegal monopolization. Microsoft had achieved, what was it, between 95% and 98% market share of the operating system market.
Basically total control.
Total control. And they leveraged that power by bundling their Internet Explorer browser directly with Windows.
Ah, the browser wars.
Yeah.
Netscape.
Exactly. Because of that OS dominance, bundling automatically gave Internet Explorer a matching near-total market share, effectively just crushing Netscape, its main competitor at the time.
And the lawsuit dragged on for years, didn't it?
It did. It resulted in a settlement that put some constraints on Microsoft's future business practices, but the internal constraints, the fear generated within the company, were arguably far more damaging than the actual legal settlement.
How so?
The internal risk aversion that grew out of that whole antitrust saga created what the sources call the Windows strategy tax.
The strategy tax. Okay, let's unpack that because it feels really critical to understanding why they eventually failed to adapt later on. What exactly did this tax do to their innovation pipeline?
It was lethal, basically. It forced the company to impose this rigid, self-censoring internal constraint. They felt they had to shut down innovative research projects or potential acquisition targets or even new product lines if those products were perceived as potentially weakening the lock-in effect of the dominant, highly profitable Windows operating system.
Wow, so they were terrified of being accused of leveraging the Windows monopoly again.
Exactly. So they deliberately prioritized protecting the established cash cow, the Windows desktop, over pioneering potentially disruptive new platforms.
So just to make it concrete, if a team inside Microsoft proposed, say, a cool new cloud service or maybe a mobile operating system that didn't fundamentally require Windows PC to function, that project was likely handicapped or just killed outright.
That's the gist of it, yeah. Because it risked cannibalizing the core Windows revenue stream, or at least not directly supporting it. It really sounds like a corporation actively strangling its own future, doesn't it?
It really does, protecting the golden goose at all costs, even if the future was flying elsewhere.
That's precisely what happened.
Yeah.
And the source material also points out this critical flaw in the regulatory process itself, the mismatch between what they call law time and new economy real time.
Meaning the legal process is too slow.
Way too slow. Antitrust cases take years, sometimes a decade. By the time remedies were imposed, the technology landscape had often already shifted dramatically, rendering the solutions kind of irrelevant.
So the only lasting legacy was the internal corporate fear and risk aversion?
Largely, yes. That internal strategy tax lingered long after the court case was technically resolved. Hashtag 2.2. The misplatform shift, 2003-2007.
Okay, so you've got this cocktail of internal constraint, the strategy tax, maybe some historical hubris from being so dominant. And that whole situation just perfectly set the stage for their catastrophic failure to capture the next major platform shift, mobile computing.
Yeah, the big miss. And it's not like they weren't even trying initially. Microsoft actually launched Windows Mobile back in 2003.
Right, I remember Windows Mobile.
And at the time, they controlled so much of the enterprise software stack, Exchange Office, that analysts fully expected them to just roll over the mobile device market. They thought it would be MS-DOS all over again.
Seemed logical at the time. What went wrong?
Well, there was a critical, kind of foundational strategic blind spot, particularly among the senior leadership. We know the famous quote from Bill Gates in 2007, right, at a major tech conference.
Oh, yeah, the separate devices quote.
Exactly. He famously stated that people would not want one single device that did everything. He really believed in device specialization. You'd have your powerful computer for work, maybe a console for gaming, a specific tablet device for entertainment, and then a phone that was primarily used just for calling or maybe light email.
He couldn't have been more wrong, in retrospect.
Couldn't have been more wrong. Because that very same year, 2007, Steve Jobs walked on stage and introduced the iPhone.
designed explicitly to be the convergence device, the one piece of hardware that did everything.
Everything. It just immediately invalidated Microsoft's entire thesis about specialized devices.
And Microsoft was just caught completely flat-footed, stuck in that Windows-first thinking.
Utterly flat-footed and seemingly stuck in the inertia of protecting the Windows ecosystem. Their attempt to actually enter the modern smartphone market with the Windows Phone didn't come until 2010.
3 years after the iPhone.
3 crucial years too late. By 2010, iOS and Android had completely saturated the market. They'd built up massive application ecosystems, the app stores.
Right, the network effects were already incredibly strong.
Exactly. Microsoft was entering a market that was already decided. The Windows Phone, despite some interesting design ideas, was quickly discontinued. They burned billions of dollars in the process.
And the consequences were huge, weren't they, according to the sources?
Immense. Missing the smartphone market was later cited as the biggest regret in business by both Bill Gates and Steve Ballmer, who was CEO then. By 2013, despite still being this massive, profitable company,
They were kind of irrelevant in the conversation about the future.
yeah, they were perceived as a backseat thought compared to the new giants setting the agenda: Google, Apple, Amazon. That internal inertia, combined with the lingering fear of regulatory action, had cost them the single largest technology transformation of the decade. A huge, huge miss.
Okay, so that brings us to the really crucial pivot point, the turnaround story. And that starts with Satya Nadella's arrival as CEO in 2014.
A critical moment.
The company was, as we said, profitable, but institutionally rigid. It feels like incremental change just wasn't going to cut it.
No, not an option. Hashtag 3.1, the necessity of reinvention.
The core challenge facing Nadella and the new leadership was, well, it sounds existential, as you mentioned earlier. Cloud computing was rapidly rendering that established high-margin Windows-first operating model obsolete.
Right, the ground was shifting under their feet.
So to survive and actually lead again, they had to effectively destroy their core past advantage, that predictable desktop revenue stream.
In a way, yes. They had to be willing to cannibalize it, or at least transition it, to survive the move to a subscription and consumption-based cloud model.
That takes guts for an established company.
It takes incredible guts. The strategic pivot required was radical. It shifted entirely from that Windows-first mentality, which had dominated for like 2 decades, to an explicit AI cloud-first strategy.
And that demanded a specific kind of leader, right?
Absolutely. It demanded a leader who could not only articulate this completely new vision, but also enforce it across an organization that was just full of these internal fiefdoms, accustomed to predictable quarterly desktop revenue.
But the sources stress, again, that the failure to adapt earlier wasn't just a technological problem, was it? It was fundamentally cultural.
Yes. A toxic internal environment had really caused the stagnation. You couldn't fix the strategy without fixing the culture first. Hashtag 3.2, cultivating the learn-it-all culture.
Okay, so fixing the culture. What did that actually involve?
It involved a massive cultural overhaul. The organization had fostered this really rigid, know-it-all culture.
Know-it-all.
Yeah. An environment that prized internal competition, encouraged different teams or silos to hoard intellectual property, penalized any mistakes really severely.
Oh, I've heard about the review system they had.
Exactly. It fostered this zero-sum annual review system known internally as stack ranking. Basically, managers had to rank their employees on a curve, meaning some had to be ranked poorly, even if they were performing well.
Wow, that sounds brutal. And probably led to teams competing against each other.
Precisely. Instead of cooperating against external rivals like Google or Amazon, teams were often fighting each other for resources, for talent, for visibility. The focus became looking successful internally rather than taking risks and experimenting externally.
Okay, so how did Nadella change that?
He deliberately moved them away from that whole system towards what he called a learn-it-all culture.
Learn it all, not know it all.
Exactly. And this was heavily inspired by the psychologist Carol Dweck's concept of a growth mindset. It emphasizes the need for humility, for continuous learning, and for constant, rapid experimentation, even if some of those experiments lead to small failures. Failure was reframed as learning.
That sounds good, but also a bit intangible, maybe. Like, how do you make humility a business strategy? How do they anchor that cultural shift to the actual mission of the company?
That's the key. By providing a crystal clear shared vision, a mission statement that directed all major corporate decisions and really provided a kind of moral compass for the employees.
Which was?
To empower every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more.
Okay.
This simple, powerful statement Replace that internal rivalry with a clear, customer-focused external purpose. The sources are pretty unanimous that this cultural change wasn't just a nice-to-have, it was non-negotiable and had to be continually managed and reinforced from the top down.
Right. But the transition from, talking about culture to actually executing it is often where these corporate reinventions fall apart, isn't it? You can put up posters about having a growth mindset,
Sure.
but if the compensation structure still rewards the old toxic behavior, then nothing really changes. So what was the critical financial lever they pulled to make this real?
This is maybe the most crucial, practical part of the turnaround. They executed a fundamental realignment of the sales apparatus. For a massive enterprise like Microsoft, the sales team is the absolute key mechanism through which strategic priorities are delivered to the customer.
Makes sense.
So they've fundamentally changed how they measured sales performance, how salespeople got paid.
Okay, how? And this is where the terminology is important, I gather. The shift was away from rewarding one-time software license. What was it? Bookings.
Yes, bookings. That was the legacy Windows revenue model. Sell a big license deal, get paid. They shifted away from that and toward encouraging the actual customer consumption of cloud services.
Bookings versus consumption. Okay, spell that out. What's the difference in practice?
That distinction is absolutely everything. Under the old system, a salesperson got their commission, their reward, the moment a customer signed a large, maybe multi-year, one-time contract for a software license, like Windows Server or Office. The incentive was basically to book the deal and move on to the next one.
Right. Whether the customer actually used the software effectively wasn't really the salesperson's primary problem.
Exactly. Under the new consumption model, the salesperson only gets their full compensation if the customer successfully migrates their workloads to Azure, or if they actively adopt and use Microsoft 365 services over the course of the contract.
Wait, so the salesperson's pay is now directly tied to whether the customer actually uses the cloud stuff they bought.
Directly tied. It adds a significant layer of accountability, maybe even risk, for the salesperson.
Yeah,
Yeah.
seems like it. How did they prevent the sales team from just, lowballing deals that got signed but then never actually got used, leaving the salesperson with no commission?
Well, that's the genius of the operational alignment, isn't it? It forces the sales force to function not just as deal closers, but as genuine customer success partners.
Ah, okay.
If the customer fails to migrate successfully, or if the technology just sits idle on the shelf, the salesperson's compensation is directly impacted negatively. This provided this really powerful, almost existential financial incentive for the entire sales force to focus relentlessly on deep customer success during the often complex cloud migration process.
So it connected everything. The culture of learn it all and customer obsession was tied directly to the core financial levers.
Exactly. It dismantled that potential internal resistance and enforced the new strategic priority cloud consumption across the entire massive sales organization. The sources suggest that without that fundamental change in sales compensation, the strategic transformation would have likely collapsed under the weight of internal resistance from people used to the old predictable license model.
Okay, so that cultural and operational shift really worked. It successfully unlocked the phenomenal financial growth we see at Microsoft today, and that growth is overwhelmingly driven by one segment, right? The intelligent cloud segment.
Overwhelmingly, yeah.
Yeah.
Tag 4.1, the financial engine.
Let's put some numbers on that financial success, just to grasp the scale.
Sure. The intelligent cloud segment is undeniably the primary engine of modern Microsoft. Azure, the main component, recently surpassed $75 billion in annualized revenue.
$75 billion from Azure alone.
Yeah. And that growth drove a 13% increase in total corporate revenue recently. The company's total annualized revenue now sits at a staggering $281.7 billion.
Wow. Just for context, that revenue figure is higher than the annual GDP of entire countries like Finland or Portugal.
It really puts the scale into perspective. It demonstrates the raw power of that pivot to cloud.
But
There's always a but.
there's a crucial detail in the financial report, something slightly alarming perhaps, or at least noteworthy. The Microsoft Cloud gross margin percentage actually decreased recently, down to 69%. Okay, so revenue is booming, but the profit margin on that revenue is shrinking slightly. Why would that be happening?
Well, management was very explicit about this. They stated that this margin squeeze was, and I quote, driven by the impact of scaling our AI infrastructure.
Ah, AI. The cost of the future.
Exactly. This confirms a massive strategic implication. Microsoft is currently engaged in the most capital-intensive investment phase in its entire history. They're pouring billions and billions of dollars into building the computational foundation, the data centers, the specialized GPUs, the high-speed networking that's absolutely necessary for this AI platform shift.
So supporting massive initiatives like Copilot, their AI assistant, and the huge OpenAI collaboration we'll talk about.
Precisely. So what this means is they are deliberately prioritizing the rapid construction of future capability, basically,
Right.
winning the AI arms race over maximizing immediate short-term margin optimization.
They're choosing market share and long-term platform dominance over hitting the highest possible profit percentage this quarter.
It's exactly right. This is the financial definition of a major strategic bet. They are consciously sacrificing some near-term efficiency to secure what they believe will be long-term platform leadership in the AI era. It signals they view this AI transition as an absolutely critical all-or-nothing race. Hashtag tag 4.2, Azure's strategic niche, the enterprise hybrid expert.
Now, despite entering the cloud market quite a bit later than Amazon Web Services, AWS,
They were playing catch-up initially.
Azure successfully carved out a highly defensible niche. They didn't just try to be a cheaper AWS, right? They found their own angle. What defines that competitive edge for Azure?
Yeah, they were smart about it. Azure successfully positioned itself as the enterprise hybrid expert. Its core strength, its main selling point, is providing the path of least resistance for massive legacy corporations.
The big companies that weren't born in the cloud.
Yes. Exactly. Azure facilitates seamless migration and, crucially, integrations for organizations that are already deeply embedded in Microsoft's extensive suite of existing enterprise services. Think things like Windows Server, Active Directory for user management, SQL Server for databases, stuff that runs huge parts of the corporate world.
So this integration advantage essentially transforms their legacy products, which could have been seen as baggage,
Right.
into actual accelerators for Azure adoption. You mentioned Windows 365 Enterprise earlier as an example.
Yeah, Windows 365 is a fantastic example of this strategy in action. It delivers virtualized cloud PCs, basically your Windows desktop, but running in Azure's data centers, streamed to any device.
Okay.
It's managed entirely through the cloud, leveraging the Azure ecosystem for connectivity, security, resilience. So by linking the legacy Windows desktop market, which used to be a one-time product sale directly to the Azure platform, Microsoft transforms it into a recurring cloud subscription service.
So they convert their massive existing Windows user base, which might have otherwise been kind of stranded or slow to move, directly into ongoing Azure consumers.
That's the play. Leverage the past to build the future. Hashtag tag 4.3. Competitive positioning in hyperscale cloud.
Okay, so given that context, that enterprise hybrid expert niche, let's quickly compare Azure to its main rivals in the hyperscale cloud market, AWS and Google Cloud Platform, GCP. How does Azure's strategy stack up?
Well, while all three offer the core building blocks, computation, storage, networking, their strategies really diverge based on their historical strengths and target markets.
Yeah.
AWS, Amazon Web Services, it kind of remains the comprehensive generalist, right? It has the most raw computational capacity globally. It still maintains market leadership in terms of sheer scale and, arguably, reliability. It's often seen as the safest bet for maximum redundancy and the widest range of services.
Okay, the big reliable default. And Google Cloud Platform, GCP.
GCP tends to specialize more in data analytics and AI innovation. Given Google's history in search and massive data processing, it excels in advanced areas like machine learning, big data tools, and supporting modern, containerized application workloads using things like Kubernetes.
So often appealing to companies doing really cutting-edge, data-intensive stuff.
Generally, yeah.
Yeah.
Or companies deeply invested in the Google ecosystem already.
Right. That leaves Azure. Its key differentiator, as you said, is that enterprise integration.
Yes. Azure is the enterprise hybrid expert. Its unparalleled strength lies in that seamless integration with existing, ubiquitous Microsoft software that runs the back offices of most large companies. For the vast majority of Fortune 500 firms already running Windows Server and SQL Server on-premises in their own data centers, Azure often presents the easiest, most compatible, and lowest friction path to the cloud.
Makes sense. Migrate what you know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
However, as we saw with the DOJ case back in the 90s, this super dominant position in enterprise software, that legacy strength, is the simultaneous source of Azure's current strength and its biggest ongoing regulatory risk.
Because leveraging that legacy power to pull customers into the Azure cloud is the very thing regulators get concerned about.
Precisely. It's a constant tension they have to manage. Hashtag tag 4.4, the OpenAI strategic nexus, de-risking frontier AI.
Okay, let's talk AI more directly. Microsoft clearly viewed the current era as a fundamental AI AI platform shift. They saw it coming and knew it would radically reshape every single layer of the technology stack.
A foundational change.
Their core proactive response to this was the massive multi-billion-dollar strategic alliance with OpenAI.
Yeah, this alliance was really born out of the necessity, wasn't it? It came from the recognition that they needed immediate access to frontier AI, to the most advanced large language models, to stay competitive. Partnering allowed Microsoft to effectively bypass the enormous multi-billion-dollar R&D cost, and maybe more importantly, the lengthy time to market associated with trying to build these foundational models entirely from scratch internally.
Right, leapfrog the hardest part by partnering. And the structure of that partnership seems highly advantageous for Microsoft, doesn't it? Securing proprietary benefits for Azure and their own AI products like Copilot.
Oh, incredibly advantageous. Two elements of the deal structure are absolute game changers for Microsoft. First, they secured rights to OpenAI's core intellectual property,
Including the models themselves.
including crucial things like the model weights, the parameters that make the AI work, and insights into the underlying infrastructure design. And they got the rights to integrate all of that directly into their own proprietary products, like Microsoft Copilot, the AI assistant, embedded across Microsoft 365, Windows, and other services.
Okay, so they get to use the secret sauce in their own stuff. What's the second key term? You mentioned Azure exclusivity earlier.
Yes, this is critical. The OpenAI API, the way developers and companies access OpenAI's models like GPT-4, runs exclusively on Microsoft Azure infrastructure.
Exclusively, so you can't run it on AWS or GCP.
Not the official API, no. It's made available to external customers solely through the Azure OpenAI service. This is a massive technical and commercial differentiator for Azure against AWS and GCP.
So if a large enterprise wants to use the very cutting edge of OpenAI's models in their own applications,
They must use Azure to do it. This arrangement essentially transforms OpenAI's groundbreaking innovation into a direct, proprietary competitive advantage for the Azure platform. It drives Azure consumption.
that's incredibly powerful. But if this alliance is so foundational to their entire AI strategy, doesn't that introduce a massive, unique risk? They're basically betting their AI future on an external, rapidly growing, and sometimes unpredictable entity.
That's a completely valid, critical reflection. Yes, it absolutely introduces a permanent operational dependency risk. The stability and, crucially, the sustained strategic alignment of an external entity like OpenAI, which has its own massive growth trajectory, its own unique and complex non-profit-for-profit governance ambitions, is absolutely not guaranteed long-term.
Right. It's not like owning it outright.
Not at all.
Yeah.
Managing that necessary co-opetition, that blend of cooperation and competition between a giant incumbent like Microsoft and a high-value, cutting-edge but still relatively young partner requires continuous, careful, formal oversight. It definitely represents a distinct strategic risk that rivals like Google building more in-house don't face to quite the same degree. #V portfolio diversification and navigating regulatory headwinds.
Okay, so beyond doubling down on the intelligent cloud and AI, Microsoft has also been really busy broadening its total addressable market, right? Through some massive strategic acquisitions designed to reinforce its ecosystem across both consumer and professional sectors.
Yeah, they haven't just focused on the enterprise cloud. They're building out the whole picture. #5.1, the gaming power play, Activision Blizzard acquisition.
And the biggest example of that recently is obviously the gaming power play, the $68.7 billion acquisition of Activision Blizzard.
Monumental. Finalized in 2023 after a lot of regulatory hurdles. And it was intended to fundamentally reshape the global gaming landscape and especially the economics of subscription models in gaming.
The sources seem to outline three core immediate strategic ambitions behind that huge price tag. The first and probably the most obvious one was just content dominance, right? Getting the big games.
Correct. Goal number one was bolstering the content library for Xbox Game Pass with these globally powerful must-have franchises like Call of Duty, World of Warcraft, Diablo.
Right. Make Game Pass indispensable.
Exactly. Game Pass is now the absolute central pillar of their consumer subscription strategy. The numbers are impressive. It boasts over 37 million active subscribers now.
Wow, 37 million.
And it contributes something like $4.7 billion to annual revenue. Importantly, executives have confirmed that this Game Pass model is indeed a profitable business unit for Microsoft. It's not just a loss leader anymore.
Okay, profitable. So ambition one, content for Game Pass. What was the second ambition? You mentioned it tackled a persistent weakness for Microsoft.
Mobile gaming. This was crucial.
Yeah.
Microsoft has historically struggled, really failed, to gain any significant traction in the massive mobile gaming market.
Right.
This deal instantly changed that by securing Activision's subsidiary, King, the creator of the globally dominant Candy Crush franchise.
Ah, Candy Crush. Everyone's played that.
Exactly. It immediately gave Microsoft a substantial and incredibly lucrative foothold in mobile gaming overnight. A huge gap filled.
Okay. And the third ambition was about reinforcing the platform itself, cloud gaming.
Yeah, integrating these major titles enhances their xCloud service. That's their cloud game streaming platform. It's critical for maintaining competitiveness in that rapidly growing cloud streaming space, especially against rivals like NVIDIA's GeForce Now and Sony's PlayStation Plus offerings.
Got it. And to actually secure all this valuable content for Game Pass, especially getting big games on day one of their release, the financing models they use are pretty innovative themselves, aren't they?
They are. The sources mention two main models they use to convince developers and publishers to put their brand new AAA games straight into Game Pass.
Okay, like the flat fee payment model.
Right. In the flat fee payment model, Microsoft basically pays the developer a pre-negotiated lump sum, often a very large one, to secure that day one availability on Game Pass. In this scenario, Microsoft assumes most of the performance risk.
Meaning whether the game is a massive hit or kind of a flop on Game Pass.
The developer gets paid their guaranteed fee regardless. Microsoft gets the content they need to drive subscriber acquisition and retention.
Okay, and the other model, full production funding.
In that model, Microsoft goes even further and covers the entire development cost of the game upfront. Huge investment.
Yeah.
But the developer gets to retain the sales revenue from platforms outside of Game Pass, so sales on Steam, PlayStation, etc.
Ah, so the developer has guaranteed funding to make the game, but still keeps a strong financial incentive to make the game a commercial success everywhere else.
Precisely. Both methods are cleverly tailored to achieve Microsoft's core goal, securing a constant stream of high-value content to keep those Game Pass subscribers acquired and, just as importantly, retained month after month. Hashtag tag 5.2, strategic acquisitions in productivity and developer ecosystem.
Okay, so that's the consumer side with gaming. But the ecosystem strategy wasn't limited to consumers, was it? They also secured some really vital professional and developer platforms to feed into that core Azure engine.
Absolutely. Two key acquisitions stand out here. First, LinkedIn, back in 2016.
LinkedIn seemed like an odd fit to some at the time.
Maybe, but strategically, it provided this massive B2B audience platform. It's critical for professional networking, recruitment, sales intelligence. And perhaps most importantly now, it allows platforms like GitHub to target specific enterprise audiences with new AI-enhanced professional tooling and data. It gives them a unique professional data graph.
Okay, LinkedIn connects the professional world.
Yeah.
And the other big one was GitHub in 2018.
GitHub, the leading open source development platform in the world, acquiring them for $7.5 billion seemed like a complete reversal of Microsoft's historical, often openly hostile stance towards open source software.
Yeah, Linux is a cancer and all that history.
Exactly. That's why the GitHub acquisition is such a perfect demonstration of the new leadership's mantra of no technology religion. They realized they had to embrace open source.
Why? What was the strategic value?
They secured the critical engagement point, the primary watering hole, for the entire global developer community. They could foster an ecosystem that builds directly on Azure using Microsoft tools integrated into GitHub. They realized that stifling open source to protect legacy products like Windows Server was the exact stagnation trap they desperately needed to escape.
So by owning GitHub, they essentially control the narrative and the tooling used by the millions of developers who will ultimately build the next generation of cloud applications, potentially steering them towards Azure.
That's the strategic logic. Meet developers where they are. And we also have to remember, amidst all this new stuff, the legacy pillars are still incredibly strong.
Yeah.
Windows still maintains a dominant, 71% share of the desktop OS market globally.
Still huge.
It's a massive installed base that they continue to leverage, subtly or overtly, to funnel users towards the Azure and Microsoft 365 cloud environment. That connection remains vital. Hashtag tag 5.3, contemporary regulatory scrutiny.
Which brings us back to the regulatory angle. Because the irony here is that despite all the massive cultural changes, the talk of openness, Microsoft's successful strategy still seems fundamentally dependent on leveraging its strength in one market, like legacy enterprise software or desktop OS, to affect competition in another newer market, like cloud infrastructure or collaboration software. And that core playbook inherently invites renewed, continuous antitrust scrutiny, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. It's the same pattern, different products, and we're seeing that play out right now, particularly in Europe. The EU is currently investigating two major areas that bear, well, an uncomfortable similarity to the 1998 browser bundling case.
Okay, what's the first one? Teams bundling.
Exactly. The European Commission is investigating whether tying the Teams communication and collaboration product directly into the Office 365 and Microsoft 365 productivity suites gives Teams an unfair, anti-competitive distribution advantage.
So the modern cloud equivalent of bundling Internet Explorer with Windows back in the day.
That's precisely the allegation, that it potentially stifles smaller, independent competitors in the collaboration market, thanks Slack, Zoom, others who don't have that enormous built-in distribution channel that comes with every Office subscription.
Okay, that's Teams. What's the second area of EU scrutiny? Azure licensing.
This one is maybe even more fundamental to the cloud battle. It centers on complaints accusing Microsoft of leveraging its dominance in core enterprise software, specifically Windows Server and SQL Server, through restrictive bring-your-own-license, or BYOL, policies.
BYOL, bring your own license. Okay, what does that mean?
BYOL is generally a license portability policy that allows customers to use software licenses they already own, maybe bought years ago for their own data centers, in a public cloud environment instead.
Sounds reasonable. Saves the customer money. What's the problem?
The problem, according to the complaints, is the restriction. Microsoft allegedly makes it prohibitively expensive or technically complex to port those existing Windows Server or SQL Server licenses to rival cloud providers like AWS or GCP.
Ah, so you can bring your license, but only easily to Azure.
That's the accusation. That they effectively use contractual and financial penalties to funnel business towards Azure, making it much harder for customers to choose a competing cloud, even if they wanted to. It's seen as leveraging that established legacy dominance, the software the customers already paid for, to lock them into Microsoft's new cloud platform.
Classic tying accusations, just in the cloud era. We did see regulatory reality bite them pretty hard with the Activision acquisition, though, right? They had to make a substantial compromise to get that deal approved.
They absolutely did. To secure global regulatory clearance, particularly from the very skeptical UK's Competition and Markets Authority, CMA, Microsoft was forced to make a significant concession.
Which was?
They had to divest the cloud streaming rights for all of Activision Blizzard's games, both current and future ones, released over the next 15 years, exclusively to Ubisoft Entertainment SA, a rival gaming company.
Wow, divest the streaming rights. So Microsoft owns Call of Duty, but Ubisoft controls where it can be streamed from the cloud.
Outside the European Economic Area, yes, it was a major climb down. But it shows they are agile enough, perhaps pragmatic enough, to compromise on a specific targeted aspect like cloud streaming exclusivity in order to protect the far more strategically valuable core assets, the game content library itself, and the overall Game Pass subscription strategy. They gave up a piece to save the whole. #C6. Synthesis, financial resilience, and future outlook.
Okay, let's try to pull all these threads together now. Let's give you the final scorecard on the success and, maybe more importantly, the sustainability of this massive corporate turnaround at Microsoft. #6.1, financial scorecard and growth.
Well, quantitatively looking at the numbers, the success is just breathtaking. As we noted, annual revenue rose from about $86.8 billion back in 2014, just before Nadella took over and the turnaround really began,
Right.
to a projected $281.7 billion in 2025. That tripling of revenue in a decade absolutely validates the pivot away from the traditional one-time product sale toward recurring subscription and cloud consumption models. The strategy worked financially.
And crucially, the company maintains exceptionally strong profitability, right? Even with those massive AI investments we discussed pressing down on margins slightly.
That's right. The gross profit margin still sits at a very healthy 68.82%, which is high for a company this size with significant hardware components. And operating income is strong, over $128 billion annually. They're making a lot of money.
And the market recognizes this.
Absolutely. This consistent high-velocity growth and profitability has driven Microsoft's stock performance, positioning it securely among the so-called Magnificent Seven technology stocks that have dominated the market recently. This external market validation really confirms the successful transition from being primarily a desktop software giant to becoming a true multi-platform, subscription-based cloud powerhouse. #6.2 Strategic Alignment Review.
Okay, so the evidence clearly confirms the cloud-first, AI-first strategy successfully navigated Microsoft away from that dangerous Windows dependence and back into a position of platform leadership. We identified, I think, 3 key elements that really made this possible looking back.
Yeah, it really feels like it was the necessary alignment of 3 things. culture, partnerships, and operational execution. First, that radical cultural change towards a learn-it-all mindset fostered the necessary humility, collaboration, and risk tolerance internally.
Okay, culture first. Second.
Second, securing those critical risk-reducing external partnerships, most notably the alliance with OpenAI, provided immediate leadership and capability in the crucial AI domain without having to build everything from scratch.
Smart partnering. And third,
achieving that disciplined operational execution, specifically by completely realigning the sales compensation structure to prioritize actual customer cloud consumption over just booking deals. That ensured the strategy actually reached the customer base and got implemented on the ground.
culture, partnership, execution. And these strategic acquisitions we talked about, Activision, GitHub, LinkedIn, they weren't just random empire building, were they? They fit the strategy.
No, they seem quite strategically aligned. They successfully broadened the overall revenue base beyond just core enterprise IT, and crucially, they reinforced the core cloud business through powerful network effects. They ensure long-term subscriber acquisition and retention across these really key ecosystems. Consumer gaming via Activision,
Right.
the entire developer world via GitHub, and the global professional workforce via LinkedIn. It all feeds back into making the Microsoft platform stickier. Hashtag Tech 6.3. Critical future risks.
Okay, so it's an incredible success story overall, but no company is without risks. Looking ahead, the sources seem to highlight three principal risks looming large, things that could threaten future profitability or stability for Microsoft.
Yes, despite the success, there are definitely significant clouds on the horizon. First, and probably the highest priority internally, remains regulatory risk.
The shadow of 1998 never really goes away, does it?
It seems not, especially not when your core strategy still involves leveraging dominance. Those current EU investigations into Teams bundling and Azure licensing could potentially force fundamental changes to the monetization models of Microsoft 365 and Azure.
Like forcing them to unbundle Teams.
No.
Or mandating easier license portability to other clouds.
Exactly. Things like mandatory unbundling or enforced interoperability changes could definitely impact future profitability and weaken the stickiness of the Azure platform if regulators push hard. It's a constant battle they have to fight.
Okay, regulatory risk is number one. What's the second major risk?
The sheer cost of the AI race.
Yeah.
The AI infrastructure cost strain is undeniable. We saw it already impacting the cloud gross margin.
Right.
The decline there confirms the extraordinary ongoing capital expenditure required just to keep up, let alone lead, in the AI infrastructure build-out. Any temporary slowing of customer AI consumption, or maybe a sudden competitive acceleration by rivals like Google or AWS in their chip development or model efficiency, could severely strain Microsoft's future margins, given the massive multi-billion-dollar upfront investments required to build the necessary data center capacity before the revenue fully materializes. It's a huge CapEx bet.
A very expensive race to be in. Okay, and finally, the third risk. You touched on it earlier. The long-term operational dependency.
Yeah, the OpenAI instability risk. That foundational strategic alliance relies heavily on the continued stability and, crucially, the sustained strategic alignment of an external entity, OpenAI, that is itself evolving incredibly rapidly and has its own unique, sometimes opaque, governance ambitions.
Maintaining that strategic unity, that co-opetition with a partner that is simultaneously critical, potentially competitive, and incredibly high value.
It represents a permanent challenge, a distinct vulnerability that requires constant vigilance and careful management. Especially as OpenAI grows, seeks potentially trillions in further funding, and maybe asserts more independence down the line. It's a relationship risk inherent in their chosen strategy. Hashtag tag outro.
Okay, so wrapping this all up, what does this incredible journey of Microsoft's reinvention really mean for you, our listener? Well, their resurgence demonstrates pretty powerfully that a major corporate turnaround requires not just a technology pivot, shifting from selling desktop product licenses to cloud subscriptions, but it demands a truly radical cultural shift. And that cultural shift has to be deeply internalized and, frankly, ruthlessly enforced via concrete financial incentives like that sales comp change.
Yeah, they ultimately succeeded by embracing the very things they historically seemed to fear. Platforms over siloed products, openness over closed systems, and continuous learning over protecting the past.
They successfully moved from rigidly protecting that Windows past to aggressively building an AI and cloud future, betting billions that the unique contextual data they possess across their ecosystem will be the ultimate differentiator in this new AI era.
Exactly. They made the hard choices.
And that leads us directly to our provocative final thought for you to consider. Given that the data pools Microsoft controls from LinkedIn, which captures professional processes, skills, networks, and from GitHub, which captures literally every developer decision, every line of code written globally are just massive and unique.
Unparalleled data sets, really.
And given that Azure offers these increasingly powerful specialized AI capabilities, is the ultimate monetization strategy for Microsoft moving beyond just selling generic Copilot AI assistant subscriptions to everyone?
Right. Is the real long-term play something more targeted? We have to ask if their ultimate focus is actually on developing highly specialized, incredibly high-margin, industry-specific, vertical AI solutions.
Like an AI specifically for lawyers trained on legal documents and LinkedIn data, or an AI for software engineering teams trained on GitHub code and processes.
Precisely. AI solutions that leverage that unique contextual data advantage that only Microsoft really possesses at that scale. If so, their next major competitive edge won't just be pure computational scale from Azure, which rivals can eventually match, but the unparalleled contextual understanding derived from the data they uniquely own across the professional and developer worlds. That could be the real moat.
Contextual data, not just raw compute. That's a really powerful thought to chew on as these AI platform wars continue to escalate.